Hello and thanks for joining us at interest.co.nz. I'm Jenée Tibshraeny and I'm joined remotely today by the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson. Thanks for your time, Minister.
No worries.
Look, all eyes at the moment are really on what comes next after the wage subsidy. And I'd like to know whether you are considering giving businesses cash and giving them the flexibility to do what they want and use that money as they see fit.
Yeah, look, I think, obviously the wage subsidy scheme has filled a really important need in terms of keeping people attached to their jobs. And that was the fundamental basis of it. And we want to continue people to stay employed as much as they possibly can. But obviously, once we get through the 12-week payment period, businesses will be making decisions about where they see their future. So what we're working on at the moment is what comes after it. What level of support is needed at a firm level, but also at a household and individual level. And so we're trying to consider those two things together. We certainly recognise that for a lot of businesses, even if, say, at the end of the 12-week period where we're at level 2 or even level 1, they still won't be back to normal. And so we're acutely aware of that and looking at a range of options in that regard. But I do think it's important by that point, we're also starting to think about people who are at an individual and household level may have lost their job or are now working significantly reduced hours. So we have to consider all of those things together.
Okay, so when you say at a household level, what are some of the mechanisms that you're looking at to support households directly? Could that be through changes to the tax system or could that be through cash payments?
Look, while everything is happening in a very dynamic environment at the moment, we are, still assessing that range of options. And you've mentioned a couple that are there. Obviously, we have a welfare system in New Zealand that supports people when they do lose their jobs. But we're obviously in a very unique situation here. So we're looking at all aspects of the way government can provide support. And that ranges, as you say, from the tax system through to the welfare system, through to, various direct transfers.
I'd just like to talk now about retail and hospitality businesses. If we do go to level 3, that'll be an optimistic sort of situation, but still those businesses won't be able to operate face to face with their customers. So if we're looking at support, are you thinking of quite targeted support for those sectors?
That's one of the really important questions to answer. And I think, as we learn more about the impact of the virus on our economy, we can make those decisions about whether we stick with universal payments or we move to things that are more targeted to particular sectors. I think there's no doubt as we go through this, there are obvious sectors that will be changed significantly by this. Tourism is one, but hospitality is another, because we are going to live in an era of physical or social distancing, I believe, for some time to come as we, eliminate the virus and get on top of it completely. And so, at level 2 in the framework, there is much more room for the hospitality industry and to operate, but it comes with the physical distancing requirements. So, yeah, look, we're very aware of that, and that will help shape the kind of responses that we give. But equally, in some of those sectors, there's a long-term adjustment now required. And so therefore, we're having to have a conversation about both the short, medium and long term all at the same time. But we're very much aware that in this immediate term, those businesses are effectively not able to trade, or certainly not in the way that they have up to now.
Okay, the options that they have at the moment are obviously the wage subsidy and then debt. So as our viewers will know, that the government is underwriting a large portion of bank loans for certain sorts of businesses. But for some businesses, they might not want to take out more debt because they might be worried they can't repay this and, there's interest and all that sort of thing. Is the government looking at other types of support, like, how open are you to equity, to buying stakes and probably particularly big companies?
Yeah, look, we obviously have created the economically significant business unit in the Treasury to look at what we need to do to keep network critical businesses alive. In the process of doing that, we have identified businesses that sit somewhere between the loan guarantee scheme, which is up to $80 million turnover, and these very large economically significant businesses. So we're currently working out what we can do in that space. whether it is extensions of that business loan guarantee scheme, or whether it's another type of support. Certainly, if the government's going to take equity stakes, and it's one of the options on the table within that economically significant business work, we want to be very judicious about that. So I think the idea that we would do that in a large number of businesses is unlikely, but we are aware that there are particularly those sort of mid-range, high-growth businesses sitting in the middle between those two schemes, and so we're certainly working on what we can do to support them there. Interestingly, we have actually seen successful capital raises in the last couple of weeks from the likes of Kathmandu and Auckland Airport and so on. So there is still support out there for businesses, and I think it's really important that those sources of support are exhausted first before we start thinking about what role the government might play there.
Okay. Just to jump back to loans, the Reserve Bank Governor Adrian Orr said before the pandemic, or the select committee, that he said banks need to be courageous with their lending, and obviously taxpayers are taking on a whole bunch of that risk, 80%. So banks, should be able to lend a wee bit more freely, but within their criteria. But the governor also noted that banks, if this continues for a long period of time, banks might not be able to keep doing that. Are you considering the Reserve Bank actually giving out loans to businesses? And I believe this is the sort of thing being done by the Federal Reserve in the US.
Yeah, look, obviously we've seen, the role of central banks and monetary policy absolutely turned on its head in the last few weeks. And, what used to be called unconventional monetary policy is just what everyone is now doing each day. Those are decisions that would ultimately be ones that the Reserve Bank and ourselves would talk about together. We haven't been discussing that up to this point. The system is working well as it is. There is liquidity in the system. And so, we'll continue to monitor it, but it's not a situation that the banks are raising with us at this point in time.
Okay. Talking about liquidity and also monetary policy, some economic experts have been calling for a slight sort of tweak in the way the Reserve Bank and Treasury work together. So at the moment, just for people watching, the Reserve Bank has committed to buying up to $33 billion of government and local government bonds, and it's doing this on the secondary market. So it'll buy those bonds from banks and others that own them. Some people are saying, actually, let's just sidestep that whole process of Treasury issuing bonds and banks and so on buying them, and then the Reserve Bank buying them. And why doesn't the Reserve Bank just buy them straight from Treasury? Let's just cut out the middle bit and get straight to it, because what the government needs is money, and why not work together more closely? What are your thoughts on that? And is that something that you are thinking about?
Well, I guess I come at it from the point of view is what we're doing now working or not working? And it is working, and it, there is interest in those markets, the secondary markets, and so therefore, the bond issuances that the government's doing and are still being subscribed and oversubscribed. So the system as it stands now is providing the amount of financing that we need. So I'm comfortable for that to continue to be the way we work. It also, because of the system it has an inherent set of disciplines in it that around both ourselves as a government on how much debt we do release or that we do create, and the bank itself in terms of how it works. And the market is actually still functioning in that regard. Obviously, we keep it under review, and if we don't believe it's working, or if the amounts of money that are required turn out to be such that it can't be sustained through the secondary market role that the Reserve Bank have, then of course we would look at that. But for now, that system and that market is still providing what we need.
Just want to talk quickly about a recovery. In a speech that you did to Business New Zealand, you talked a lot about being able to use this as an opportunity to push reset, I guess, on the economy and address some of the inequalities. At the same time, you need to sort of, it's important for the government to get a bit more revenue to get the books back in shape. Are you considering taxes like a wealth tax, for example, or a higher taxes for higher income earners?
We haven't given that consideration yet. And the issue for us is that we are in obviously the first waves of this, the response and the recovery phase. We will be giving some attention to that longer term fiscal strategy and over the coming weeks and months. But at this point, the focus has very much been on making sure we provide cash flow and confidence into the economy. Clearly, at some point, we will want to, stabilise our fiscal position and start returning to more of the levels that we've seen in the past. But I think I've said publicly several times, we are looking ahead to a reasonably long period of higher levels of debt and deficits. That's just the reality of what we've needed to do. The financing of that will turn our minds to over the coming months.
Okay. Finance Minister Grant Robertson, thank you so much for your time. I know you are very busy at the moment, so we do appreciate it. And
Thanks,
thank you. And I'm Jenée Tibshraeny from interest.co.nz.